Morning all. I found this fun game by Natalia Pogonina in the Russians women's Superfinal. So just played a couple of days ago, 7th of August 2012. She's doing very well, and this is a very nice game, I think. E4 by Natalia, and her opponent's Gunina played the Caro-Kann, and we see the advance variation with E5 being played. So bishop f5. I used to think this was offering black an easy game, like a bit like a French defence structure with the bishop outside of the pawn chain, so you get this French defence structure. But it's more complicated than that. There's a lot of other variables here. So knight f3 e6, the bishop is outside the pawn chain. Bishop e2, avoiding the trade of the bishops, and I think Nigel Short popularised this with numerous wins. So knight e7, one of the issues here is black's awkward development. Has to spend more time developing the kingside of the castle's h6. Now after knight bd2 we see bishop g6, which shows that maybe knight f5 is wanting to be played. Okay, and after knight b3 indeed we do have knight f5, which makes way for the bishop. So this delay in development of the kingside is apparent in this variation. Also, it seems, in the French defence you'd be usually wanting to play c5 to unwind the pawn chain. So this is kind of inhibited by knight, this knight maneuver, locking down, discouraging c5. And also we get a4, and normally you wouldn't play this really a4 much in the advanced variation of the French, but it is significantly different position now. After knight d7, even a5 is played. So it seems there's a wider interest, not just tying down this pawn, but also this pawn, and the dark squares here in general. These three dark squares are kind of locking down, basically, the entire black queen side is an idea, which isn't apparent in the advanced variation of the French, where black gets an early c5. So how different the fundamental concept of the bishop outside the pawn chain with a French defence looking position is from the reality. In reality, white's strategy is all about restraint now of the whole queen side, and trying to make use of this delay in development black has for getting the king side bits out. So a6, which seems to concede, the marking out on the dark squares here, the restraint of these guys. And now we see c4, which changes the picture again. That actually this c file, is it going to be shared by both players, or is white just going to have the semi-open c file with pressure of an outpost square on c5? Well, after bishop e7, black doesn't want both sides to share the c file. After black does want both sides to share the c file, pardon me. If e takes d, let's imagine what would happen. There's a little bit of mobility here with e6, but is that actually dangerous? Let's just check this with an engine in this position. It seems white might be better with bishop d3 and then queen c2. So what's happened actually, the pawn here is reinforcing f5, so this engine line is emphasizing gang up on f5 because it's saying bishop d3, queen c2. This gangs up on f5, so let's demonstrate bishop d3. If castles, for example, queen c2, then f5 is on. So say like this, and now e6 again, dangerous. So that's interesting. That potentially, this is the stronger way to capture here, to play c takes d5 more solid because of f5 being a concern. So c takes d5 is played, and we have bishop d3 anyway. So is f5, isn't it just secure with that pawn on e6? Well, actually, after castles g4, weakening a bit the king side, but are these weaknesses actually exploitable? Natalia is factoring in, weaknesses have to be exploitable, I think, to actually be weaknesses. So knight h4. So what does this do? It provides white maybe with f4, f5 later. So she takes, and she's unblocking the pawn, and we get this exchange of light square bishops. Okay, so potentially, in theory, there's a classic game, Nimzovich against Capablanca, where Nimzbich got completely done over after the exchange of light square bishops. But in that game, black had the c file, a safe king. There wasn't an apparent f4, f5 break. That was completely locked down. In fact, I think the structure was even worse, like this with white's pawns there, a complete light square blockade. But things were a lot different to that game here. There isn't a light square blockade on f5 here. In fact, f4, f5 looks like a classic pawn chain attack. You'd want to undermine the pawn chain here at e6, the most exploitable base. There isn't such a big deal about c4 or a knight coming to c4. That's been ruled out because of this restraint. Not only restricts the pawn but also the knight a little bit. So this pawn on a5 and this knight ready to spring to c5 means that actually this knight's kind of tied down, because otherwise knight c5 is going to be dangerous. And in fact, the dark squares still look a bit painful after bishop d2, as though bishop b4 is also useful to drive away the rook as an option. Black plays now f5, and this f5 is not reacted to with e takes. White is not keen to lose the pawn wedge, the spatial pawn wedge grip, which pokes into a lot of dark squares and maybe even provide support for a bishop on d6 later. No, in fact, h3 is played. Okay, and now it's difficult for black with this pawn structure. Black plays rook f7, and now we see f4. And basically, white, as we've seen, I think in a rapid game recently, white can just build up on the g file with the option of g takes and targeting the king later. So rook c8, okay, bit of counterplay on the queen side, you might argue. King h2, bishop e7. But now rook g1, so building up on the king side, preparing defense. Rook g3, preparing to double rooks, a bit ominous. Rook c7 looks a little bit passive. Rook ag1, bishop h4, an annoyance move. Does it really actually achieve much? It drives the rook back to g2. Okay, now queen c8, as though rook c2 might be annoying. It's ruled out now with bishop c3, just in case, which still protects a5. So we've got two things protecting a5. We've got the potential for also knight c5. Or this knight can be used over here to drive away this bishop. Knight g6 is played now. So f4, is that actually weak here? f4. At the moment, not really, because after queen e3, if black ever takes here, then rook g4 protects f4 and also puts pressure down the g file and also hits the bishop as well. Knight e7, and now the knight is used as we've seen, I think, in another game recently, to just attack that bishop. It's coming to attack the bishop if needed. Black doesn't wait though, plays fg now, forcing the move. After hg, okay, so why wasn't rook g4 played? Knight f5 springs a very beautiful knight on f5 to be avoided. Light square blockade, huge knight on f5, forget that. So block the g file, it's a compromise, but it's needed. The important thing is to get in f5 without giving black the f5 square as a beautiful blockade. You know, it's okay with blasting g file and threats of queen h6, but not as a beautiful blockade. g5 now is played by black, stopping, maybe discouraging the use of the g file, but f5 is played anyway, because I mean this is now a stranded bishop. If this g file pressure becomes apparent, then knight f3 is threatening to win that bishop. It would be a pinned pawn. After e takes f5, in fact here g takes f5 is not played because there's also queen f5 as an option, so that's ruled out with this next move e6, which does seem to weaken the e6 pawn after rook f6. But now g takes f5, and this is getting very interesting indeed. What is going on here? Let's just engine check this position. What is going on indeed? It seems technically black might have been better here. Rook takes f5 might have been playable, but we have things to factor in like knight f3. Okay, so knight g6 apparently defends that. Rook g4, king h8. Maybe black could have survived this. Okay, But still, okay, let's look at other options. Knight takes f5, is that a disaster? Queen e5 might be strong here, apparently. Hitting the rook. So if the king, for example, did this, then okay, rook f1 would be great. So this could cause some problems for black. So anyway, black was discouraged. She played actually rook c6, which maybe okay is an okay move technically, but what's the follow-up now? Queen h3 hitting the bishop. Knight takes f5 was played. Knight f3. So here critically it seems king h8 would have been quite critical for white's attack, but black allowed some fun to happen now. Black didn't play king h8, black played rook c takes e6, which and when we're back in the game, so let's turn horrid engines off. Back in the game here, human game. Rook c e6, maybe not the best. Okay, fine. But knight takes h4, yes, it looks as though white's winning a piece here. Rook e3, but there needs to be a fantastic resource in this position, because this is getting very uncomfortable indeed. Or accurate play. Knight f3 is played. So where is white's g-file attack? Actually, after queen f4, a real corker here was played in this position, leading to an exciting position. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay. Knight takes g5. So if it takes, then we'd have a discovered, nice little discovered check, winning the queen back with advantage. So what we get now is a bit of a king chase. It's quite exciting. Takes, check, king f8, check, king e7, and the king's chased now quite a long way off the check. We get going all in with the rooks. The other one joins the party. Check, check, and now in this position, I just thought this is quite amusing. This game. In this position, b3 check is played, and you might think rook takes b3, but actually, okay, I think there's something horrible on rook takes b3. I think it's generally a horrible position, but if rook takes b3, it looks as though, without checking, it looks as though queen takes is possible, and then bishop d6 check, winning the queen with advantage. So in the game, actually, after b3, king takes was played. Then we have rook c3 check, quite powerful, so the queen's ready to come over here. King a2. If king a4, then rook a3 check is mating, I believe. So the king's driven now to a2. It's great stuff. Queen g2, and that's the end of the game. Okay. Now I think this is the fun of chess, really. I've actually received a comment which got me thinking. I've seen a comment which got me thinking, rather, in the last couple of days, that if you play with a dynamic attacking style, you know, isn't that, it's not as good, it's not as clean, in inverted commas, as a positional style, because afterwards, for example, you'd see lots of blunders if you engine checked the game. I don't know. The point of playing chess is to have fun. It's not necessarily to see how you mark up according to an engine after the game. So good for Natalia, I say, in playing like this, taking some risks, using that g-file, chasing the king around the board. This is my sort of game. What happens here in the final position, by the way? if king a1, I suspect rook c1 is strong, and if king b2, then all sorts is strong. Bishop d6, discover check, win the queen, or just mate on b2. I think mating on b2 is more accurate. So let's have a look at this game again. Okay, with those naughty engines, any game we're going to play, you know, it's probably going to be inaccurate anyway, even if you did want to play dry positional chess. And you know, I think it's a fun game, and this wins games quite often, because opponents, if you want to win games against other humans, you know, it's often about setting problems. Setting problems might not be objectively playing the best moves in the position. You know, take Lasky, he set psychological problems, he set problems for the opponent, you know, to try and give them maybe attacking positions, you know, how could they actually exploit it, and sometimes he'd give them hope to crush that hope apparently. But setting the opponent problems might not be playing absolutely clinical chess, but it's setting g-file problems here. And there was a positional basis for all this attack, a positional background, that white has the space advantage in the centre. White has the counterplay locked down on the queen side as a positional basis for the attack. Okay, it just so happens that there might have been some resources available to the opponent. This g5 was very interesting though in the actual game, because it seems as though, you know, f5 was very, very dangerous. So g5 was interesting anyway, as a way of you know, saying goodbye to the bishop. Hope you're okay there on h4 for the rest of the game, or for a large part of the game. Okay, so white may have Natalia may have taken some risks here, it seems, from an engine point of view, but you know, the king safety is setting concrete you know, problems for the opponent. So rook e3, knight f3, and it so happens that now this neat tactical blow, knight takes g5, was made available using that g-file, leaving the queen hanging just temporarily to create this discovered check, which happened to win the queen back here. So it's a neat tactic here, and it's a very, very fun king chase. And even here, I think the engine critics will argue, well, maybe, you know, even here black might have been better apparently. King f7, or even okay, king f7, some accurate king stepping maneuvers. Well, you know, we're human, we're not going to see all the best moves all the time, so king f8 was played, and we get the wonderful king chase. So check, we get to see this check and this beautiful b3 move, which continues the chasing. Okay, this could have been the logical conclusion, but it was resigned earlier than this, so check. And check could have been a conclusion to the game. Hope you enjoyed it. I did. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.